Hi guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch, and today I'm answering questions about growing in our wooden seed trays. So you may have seen a few videos back that we were making and filling and using these new wooden seed trays, and by new I mean this is actually a really old idea. So back in the day before plastics, this is how nurseries used to grow out seedlings. This is how gardeners grew out their own seedlings at home. There was no plastic, they used wooden trays. So as much as this seems revolutionary based on how we've learned how to garden today and how marketers have told us we should be gardening today, that's not the way it was always done. And we didn't always have to create microplastic pollution in order to start seeds. So we started doing this sort of off the cuff. We built them, we filled them, we've been using them now. I'm going to tell you in this video all of the ins and outs of using wooden seed trays. I'm also going to tell you when we are still using our soil blockers and our fiberglass trays, some frequently asked questions that I've been getting, and I think that's all. So you all might know that I have been on this rampage against plastic for a few years now. And really this started when we learned about plastic landscape fabric, which is actually polypropylene. As much as we hear it being called fabric, it's actually a plastic product. In much of the education that I did, a lot of the reading that I did, I was told that these things are good for the soil, that they help retain moisture, they help shade the soil, they help prevent weeds. However, when we did our own research, what we found was that what actually happens with polypropylene-based landscape fabrics is that they break down slowly into microplastics in the soil. Those microplastics in the soil are usually there for thousands of years, absolutely definitely our lifetimes, and even probably beyond. They slowly leach their way into our water supplies, and especially this happens as they age. So a newer landscape fabric, like a first-year landscape fabric, isn't going to leach as much microplastics as, say, a 5 or a 10-year landscape fabric. But there's really no good way to recycle these fabrics either. So you can't just say like, okay, well then I'll buy new landscape fabric every year so that it's not breaking down into microplastics, because it's still ending up in the landfill. There's no good way to recycle these landscape fabrics yet. And plastic recycling is not good for the environment anyway. It releases a lot of microplastics just in the process of recycling. So anyway, all that being said, my plastic rant for the day, it has made us question so much of the practices that we have been taught to use, the advice that I have heard and I have received, and the books that I have read, and the things that I've been told I should be doing in the garden. And it's made me realize that a lot of those things are marketing based. Everyone's trying to sell us a product, right? And if they say, well, just use some free mulch, well then what are they gonna sell us? So, you know, a lot of market farmers use these plastics. Plastics are a huge problem in agriculture, but also just in home gardening. And you guys remember in one of our most recent videos, we talked about the study that found that home gardens actually put off more carbon emissions. The carbon footprint of a home garden is higher than that of conventional agriculture. And a lot of that comes down to all of these plastic seed trays that we're buying, the landscape fabric, the raised beds, the infrastructure, all of these things play into our carbon footprint as home gardeners. So I started thinking about, you know, how can we reduce this? Now, obviously we've been doing this for years. We've used our soil blockers and our fiberglass trays now for a long time. And I still do love that method. However, the fiberglass trays are expensive. They're costly for a lot of people, and the soil blockers, while if you break down a soil blocker over your lifetime as a gardener, it's $45-ish for a soil blocker, but it will last you your entire lifetime. So really pretty affordable when you think about it. But the fiberglass trays are not inexpensive. And so I wanted to think of a way that I can make this more accessible to more people and use less materials. So I thought, well, wood seed trays really solve this problem because we can source wood from any number of places. From Craigslist, we can source it from Facebook Marketplace. I find old wooden fence posts advertised all the time on Craigslist, and they're typically untreated. They're usually just plain raw wood. That's a great place to start if you want to be building these wooden seed trays. Reclaimed lumber from the Habitat for Humanity Restore is another great place. So we made these trays. I wasn't sure how they were going to do, and I have been so pleased with their performance. I had no idea that they were going to do as well as they were going to, that I was going to love this process as much as I do, because it's fast too. So when I'm filling my wooden seed tray, I just literally am dumping my dirt in and spreading it out, and then I make little dividers in it. It's really pretty quick in terms of it's really very quick as far as the process goes. So let's go through some of the questions that I've gotten today. Let's start with materials. So one of the biggest questions I've gotten in showing these is, well, what about using pressure treated wood? We've all heard don't use pressure treated wood in the garden. There's actually been studies done on this pressure treated wood in the garden issue. They found that actually the contaminants from pressure treated wood don't really work their way into the soil, but the concern with pressure treated wood really comes from pre-2003. So prior to 2003, arsenic was used in the manufacture of pressurized wood. Obviously that's not a great thing. And so that's where the recommendation to not use pressure treated wood in the garden came from. Well, after 2003, they stopped doing that. So now arsenic is not allowed in pressurized wood, so it's really not an issue any longer. So if you're using wood that was pressurized and post 2003, studies have been done, that is perfectly safe to use in a garden situation. Even with wet soil and all that stuff, you're not going to contaminate your soil by using pressure treated. But I typically still prefer using non-pressure treated wood just because I'm leery of everything. From all of my experiences, that's what I've learned, is just to be cautious. So I still don't like to use pressure treated wood myself, but I would say it is still an option. So that leaves us with a couple of different options. One of those is cedar and the other one is redwood. Both of those options are great for long-term garden longevity. They are harder woods. They're slower to rot and to break down. And cedar fencing is often found on, again, Craigslist, or people are taking down old raised beds, whatever. It's okay if they're not in perfect shape. If the wood is breaking down a little bit, that's fine. The only thing I would caution you to not use, again, pressure treated wood pre-2003 or wood that has been painted or stained on the side that you're going to be using for seed starting, because a lot of those stains have kind of nasty ingredients. Polyurethanes, latex paints are plastic based, so those can chip off and make little microplastics in your soil. And older wood that's been painted could contain lead. So, I don't like to use anything that's been painted or stained. I like to use raw wood, and anything really manufactured after 2003 in terms of pressurized is going to be okay as well. The second question I always get is, what about waterproofing? Aren't these going to rot? So the answer to that is yes and no. It depends on a few factors. So just like any raised wooden garden bed is going to break down over time, to me that's a good thing, by the way. I would rather have my beds biodegrade and turn back into soil than to have to throw them out. I don't know, just personally to me, the fact that they rot and biodegrade is a good thing. But nevertheless, I can see how you wouldn't want to put in that much effort for something that's going to break down quickly. The good news is these wooden seed trays are going to last even longer than a wooden garden bed will, because all summer, all fall, all winter for the most part, they're sitting there dry. They have lots of time to dry out in between uses. And when they are wet and full of wet soil, they're only going to be that way for about 8 weeks, up to 12 weeks maybe. So it's not that long of a time that they're sitting there with wet soil inside of them. So keep that in mind. But the other thing is there are waterproofing options available. So the ones that I have tried, there is a beeswax and linseed oil blend that we have used to treat our wooden beds, our pergolas. In fact, all of our wood in our garden we typically treat with this beeswax linseed blend, and I'll link that down below. And the other way is that Shosugi Ban, which is a Japanese waterproofing method that uses a flame to sear and char the outer layer of the wood and then seals it with an oil like linseed oil or beeswax, and that really makes a great waterproof surface. I know there's also wood stabilizers. I haven't tried that yet myself. So don't worry, if your concern is about the fact that they're not going to have longevity, they're still going to last you much longer than your plastic will. And at the end of life, you're not going to have to be concerned about them ending up in landfill and contaminating our planet with microplastics. All right, next question, what do you use to fill them? If you watched the video where Cora and I built these trays and filled them, you remember that we filled one with wool on the bottom, raw, untreated wool. I think we used Midnight, so it was black on the bottom of the tray, just a real thin layer. And then we did one tray without that. Guys, the tray that had the wool on the bottom far surpassed the other tray. Nothing else was different. The light was the same. All of the other treatments were the same. The seeds were the same. It was the only difference was having the wool on the bottom or not. So the wool we put there for a couple reasons. One was I was thinking it would be kind of a moisture barrier in case I overwatered, that it would kind of help catch any extra water at the bottom of the tray, but also as nitrogen. So once those roots reached all the way down to the wool, they'd be able to uptake the nitrogen from that wool to slow release nitrogen, and it would help the plants grow as they reached the bottom. So we found that to be true. Both of those things definitely worked. Those plants look amazing. I mean, both of them look good, but the ones with the wool look incredible. And then I just filled them with our peat-free potting soil mix. We use Fox Farms Coco Loco. No, they don't sponsor us. It's just the one I prefer. It doesn't have any peat ingredients. Remember that the harvest of peat is really unsustainable. It's pretty bad for the environment. So we use peat-free, and the blend is called Coco Loco. I just pour that straight into the seed tray right from the bag and plant right into it. So that's what we use to fill them. Now, when we're filling them, I like to wet the soil first, and I use my little putty knife to make all those little separations in the tray. So by doing that, I'm creating a spacing. So where with the seed tray, we would be able to see like, okay, I'm gonna put one in each, and that's how we're gonna space them out. You wouldn't wanna just broadcast your seeds all over the top. I know some people do that to save time. I don't find that it's time saving because you have to go back and thin things, and then you have spots in the tray where there aren't any seedlings growing. I don't know. Just to me, take the time at the beginning to create some little box, some little squares of soil, and plant right into it. So you're gonna wanna wet it first, really thoroughly wet and moisten the soil, and then go in and make your divisions with your putty knife, and then you can plant your seeds right into there. All right, heat mats. Another question I got was heat mats. Do the heat mats work with the soil? So yes and no. I found that it depended how much soil I put in the tray. If I filled the tray all the way up to the top, the heat didn't really make it all the way up to the top layer of the soil where the seeds were. It kind of heated the bottom, and that was it. Ooh, it did heat the soil a little bit. The other thing you can do if you use shop lights like I do, remember when we built our DIY seed starting shelf, using those LED shop lights, those shop lights actually put off some heat. So what I found is if I lowered my lights down and put them right at the surface level of the soil, they heated the soil enough to help germination. So it kind of served like a top-down heat mat. Humidity domes, you guys know I like to use beeswax treated fabric. So this is the great thing about building these yourself. You can customize them to whatever size you want them to be. Now, I made mine pretty big. This is the size that I made ours. This is one that's been treated with the Show Sugi Bond, so that's why it's black, because we seared it, and then we treated it with a mix of beeswax and linseed oil, but it is now waterproof, so water does bead off the surface of this tray. But I made this one pretty big, and my concept was that because I start a lot of seeds, and when I'm transplanting, I want to be able to carry out a whole flat worth. In hindsight, I would have made them smaller because when they're full of wet soil, they are pretty heavy. So the great thing about making your own, though, is you can customize them to whatever your seed starting unit looks like. If you have a shelf, make sure you design these so that you can fit 2 on each shelf, for example, or 3 on each shelf. You can make them narrower. You can make them the same depth as your shelf, so you can really customize them to what you need. That also relates to our humidity domes. So with the humidity domes that I make, which are just the fabric coated with beeswax, we can cut those pieces to the exact size of our seed trays. So if I know that my seed tray is going to be this size, I can cut that piece of fabric to this size, treat it with the beeswax, reuse it every year. No plastic needed. And yes, that fabric does still let light through. So if it's a seed that needs light for germination, a light colored fabric will still let light through. If you want darkness for germination, you could do the opposite. Use a black fabric as your humidity dome, and then it will black out most of the light. I like to use beeswax pastilles. You can do this in a couple different ways. You can sprinkle the beeswax on top of the fabric and put it into a 200-degree oven for about 10 minutes until it melts. Or you can take your fabric, sprinkle your beeswax. You could also take your fabric and you could put it on a layer of wax paper, sprinkle your beeswax over the top, another layer of wax paper, and then iron it. That's another way you could do this. So that's how I make my plastic-free humidity domes. Watering is another question that I get. How do you bottom water with these trays? So I don't. Let me just tell you. These have big old slats in the middle. So if I tried to bottom water with these, the water would just run out the bottom. There's really no way to kind of do that. So that is what I usually do with our soil blocks. At the end, I'm going to talk about when I still am going to use soil blocks versus when I'm going to use these. These I just top water. Very simple. You know, I know that we've heard that you shouldn't tap water your seedlings. I've never had problems top watering. In fact, usually even with my soil blocks, once they have a lot of roots, I switch to top watering because I just don't have time to bottom water 14,000 seedlings. So we usually do it over the top anyway. As long as you have a fan going in the area to help with the circulation, that's gonna be just fine. I usually mist them until they've germinated over the top, just so that I'm not displacing the seeds. And then after that, once those roots have started to establish, I top water. But the great thing about these trays is that they really retain moisture longer and better than most traditional seed trays. So because there's so much soil all together, it really retains the moisture so well. So you're not having to water as frequently as in a seed tray and not as often as even with soil blocks. All right, next up, the question that I got was planting. Let me show you my planting tool. So people were asking, how are you gonna get these out to plant? So this is what, we use. I just use a spoon. This is like a big or a serving spoon. And I just go into my tray. I scoop out each seedling. You can kind of go around it, especially with the first couple. You can kind of go around it, scoop it out, plant it. That's it. It's that simple. And this is how they used to send seedlings home, by the way. They would just take out each one, bundle it in newspaper, send it home with people. That was it. So that's how we handle transplanting. Did a little bit last week. It was a breeze. I never have liked dealing with the plastic trays and trying to get them out of there. I know that now they make the ones with the holes in the bottom you can pop up and out, but then we're still dealing with the plastics issue. Anyway, so that's what I use to transplant. Just your regular kitchen spoon. I swear half my silverware is somewhere in the field. So that's pretty much it. A couple of the other questions I've been getting a lot are, do they leak? No, they don't leak, but I also don't drench them. I water them to moisten, but I'm not soaking them. I just keep an eye on it, and I water them over the sink, and I just water them until they seem moist. If I do start to see any water coming out the bottom, I stop, but the wood tends to absorb any of that excess water down at the bottom. So that's the good news. They don't leak. So if you're indoor seed starting like I am this year in our basement, remember we're seed starting them at my in-laws' house because we're still not living here at the farm. Hopefully it will be done by summer. We're starting inside too this year. It hasn't been a problem at all. They don't leak all over the floor. They're just fine. And then the other question I've been getting as I was showing transplanting was, does that damage the roots as you're scooping them out? So this kind of leads me into the last thing I was going to talk about, which is, are you still using soil blocks and fiberglass trays? Are you doing all wood? What's the balance here? So personally, I really like the aesthetics, and I know this is silly to say and kind of, I don't know, maybe it's not as important, but if you followed me for a long time, you know that I got my fiberglass trays from a restaurant that was going out of business. I didn't pick the colors. I didn't pick the materials. No one else in the industry was using fiberglass trays at that time. I was the first one to do this. And I just used them because I found them. And I got all of them for free or for $20, and they were so cheap. And they were yellow, bright yellow. I don't love the aesthetics of them. I don't like going out into my greenhouse and seeing this all these bright yellow. It's just not my vibe, okay? I clearly like a lot of brown. So the wood seed trays really fit with my aesthetics. I know that's silly, but I do like them. I think they're just pretty, and I think they just invoke this natural feeling, and that's what I always like to try to get in the garden, is this kind of derived from nature vibe. So I am really leaning toward converting to growing in the wood trays as much as possible. However, I am still soil blocking a lot of things, and I'm going to tell you what those things are and why. So when I create these little dividers in the soil, so I take my little putty knife and I make my little divisions. Obviously, as we top water, those go away a little bit. I'll often redo them maybe once or twice as they're growing, just to help keep those dividers in place. But inevitably, those roots are going to grow together a little bit. The same does happen somewhat with soil blocks too, right? If you've ever soil blocked, you know this. There is some growth that happens in between the blocks. You have to pull them apart in order to separate them. So that's normal. But with this method, with the wood tray method, you're definitely going to get more growing together than you would in soil blocking. So when will we still use soil blocking? Well, it's when we're growing something that is particularly sensitive to root disturbance. So I'm talking poppies, I'm talking sweet peas, anything that I know is particularly sensitive to root disturbance. Lisianthus is another one. I'm going to be growing those still in my soil blocks. So because they really create a better division between seedlings versus this method of the wooden seed tray. I think I covered it all, but if there's something that I forgot to cover or you still have questions about or you just want to give some feedback on, please feel free to put it below. If you're trying this year, please let me know how it goes. I'm so excited to hear. And as always, guys, I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate all of you being here, listening to me go on and on about environmental concerns in the garden, being here with me on this journey, just being an amazing community. I appreciate you guys all so much. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe. It means a lot to us here at the farm. And we'll be seeing you guys around here soon.